Welcome to our ULI Difference Maker series. It's our first Difference Maker series where we feature a difference maker in the community and hopefully engage in a very informative discussion where we advance the ball, peel back the onion, have a good discussion of things going on here in our city. My name is Louis Oliverio from the law firm of Dinsmore & Scholl, and I am the District Council Chair for ULI Pittsburgh. I'm getting near the end of my term as chair, so fortunately or unfortunately, this will be one of the last times I'll be opening these things. Since we last convened, I had an opportunity to attend the ULI midwinter meeting in Paris. And it was an incredible experience, one where we really got a very good idea of where we are headed in the future. And where we're headed is directly related to Pittsburgh, because I believe Pittsburgh has the opportunity to be one of the leading cities in the next technology. Perhaps it's not a coincidence today we have March Madness going on here in the city. I don't know how many of you follow basketball. But it was interesting, as part of March Madness, ESPN did a documentary on Christian Laettner. I was a freshman at Duke when Christian was playing, and so I'm sitting in front of my TV Sunday night, and there's a picture of me, a very close-up picture of me cheering the Duke Blue Devils on in 1992. And my cell phone starts going off, people see this, you're on TV, and I thought back to 1992, and I thought, you know, this is before we had the internet, which has been the transformative technology of the last 20 years. We didn't have tweets and social media back in 1992. It's changed. And I believe where we are in 2015 is we're not yet revealing what will be the transformative technology. And this is what I really took away from ULI in Paris. It's going to be self-automated vehicles. It's going to be robotics. It's going to be all these conveniences that are going to make our life different. And how this relates to Pittsburgh is very simple. Carnegie Mellon is a key leader in this technology. So when we look at our future sites, the Almano site could someday be a site for developing technology tied in with private industry, working with the educational resources at Carnegie Mellon. Perhaps in 3 years when the NCAA tournament returns to Pittsburgh, there will be a vibrant district of entertainment and offices at the Civic Arena site. And more people will be living in the Strip District and walking to work, making a short walk, and making Pittsburgh home. So we have a tremendous opportunity in the city. And with that, it's a real pleasure to introduce our new planning director, the city planning director, Ray Gastil. Ray is the former planning director of Seattle and director of the Manhattan office of the New York City Department of Planning. He's been an educator and consultant and has experience in regional planning with a focus on urban issues well suited to Pittsburgh. Gastil is the founding director of the Van Allen Institute and Gastil Works. He is a former design and architecture professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and Penn State University, director of Regional Design and Transit-Friendly Communities, Regional Plan Association in New York, and a writer and researcher for the Robert A. M. Stern Architects in New York. Gastil has a master's degree in architecture from Princeton and a bachelor's in literature from Yale University. Ray was recently appointed by Mayor Peduto as a participant in the 2015 class of fellows for the Rose Center for Public Leadership. Also serving on the Pittsburgh team is Karen Abrams from URA, Presley Gillespie of the Neighborhood Alliance, and Matt Barron from the City of Pittsburgh. And having participated in the Rose Center, that was, again, a very good process. But in any event, we are really honored to have Ray Gastil speak to us today. So now I will turn the program over to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lou, and I want to thank all of you here for coming this morning. I'm told this is a good draw, so I have to set a precedent so the next one is good too. I'm a great believer in ULI. I am a member. And I have even paid for it, although this year with the Rose Fellowship, it's a special treat for me. ULI was important in Seattle and in New York and here. I think it's a as is attested to by the Rose Fellowship work here, and the work that I've had the opportunity to go to Omaha for a workshop, and they've come here to look at Almano here in Pittsburgh, and there's also Karen Abrams will go into Seattle, Presley Gillespie will be going to Boston in exchange with all those cities, which I think is really productive, and is one of the kind of, ULI is a sort of a very special part of the world of urban development and the questions of urban development through its publications, through its the work that people do together, and through the councils like this one. So I also want to start with this talk is going to be, I'll be honest, this talk's going to be, you heard the sort of 2 degrees, the literature and the architecture one. This is going to be a little on the literature side. I'm going to be painting some broad strokes. And I'm happy to answer detailed questions and on issues and specific projects. If I don't know all the answers, we'll follow up with you. And I also want to make a commitment, though, because I have found in my life that if you make the commitment, it is the best way to possibly do it. When I come back to you, and when you invite me to speak again, which I hope you will, I'm going to have a much more numbers-driven one and quantifiable one, because I think both of these are what we need. We need the sort of vision language, but we also need to back it up with the data and the information to prove the points and to prove that it's possible, and to prove that even, in the sort of scenarios of the future that it's possible. And I think I'll describe a little bit of that conceptually in this one, because one of the points I'll be making is that none of this is new. I mean, we often think that data or something is some magical new thing. But when you actually begin to uncover the history of planning in the city of Pittsburgh, much less the United States, you see that this dilemma of how do we actually have data to help us inform our decisions, how do we actually survey, then plan, and how do you sort of do it all at the same time, is part of a story that we're living and keeps being repeated, and is okay that we keep repeating it, and that the goal is to make sure we use the most contemporary tools and have the strongest contemporary vision. So let me start by saying also something that I think that, given that you all are, I don't know if I get 2 mics and feedback or what's going to happen here, I want to mention something that I think that, since many of you are in the process, many of you work in the trenches of getting projects through the city and getting things built in Pittsburgh or elsewhere, but I know the Pittsburgh experience best now. And I just want to remind you that, we thank you for investing in the city of Pittsburgh. I know it doesn't always seem that way when you're going through a grueling planning process, but I assure you that that is the bottom line and the core issue here is, is that this is community development, economic development. This is a city needs people to invest in it, and that translates into land use and translates into all other aspects of the economy and the people of the city and all the different ways that investment can be defined. But you are part of the investment in the city, and that's something that I get up every day and think about, and I thank you for your commitment and the risks that you take for this city. It's very much appreciated from the public side. Thank you. Okay, I'm done. Let's see. Planning works, making a difference in Pittsburgh. Now, I'm going to make a case, and it is evidence-based, though I may not be able to marshal all the evidence. And if you want to argue with me about it, it would be a great discourse. But I'm going to make a case that planning actually works. That, like, city planning, in fact, makes changes. And also, sometimes it takes a long time. But if you actually look around you and see what's happening, and also look back 100 years, look back 10 years, look like, in between, wherever you want to go, that you will find that for all the qualifications we bring to planning, it actually can be an effective tool in helping a city change and transform. As you know, kind of globally, my friends who were sort of, big thinkers about architecture, they always said, the totalitarian regimes of the middle of the 20th century ruined planning forever, because like everybody sort of always assumes there's these 5-year plans or 10-year plans that are kind of all top-down and so forth. Planning was never really that way in the United States, and it certainly wasn't ever really that way in Pittsburgh. And it's certainly not that way now. And so, but planning is an evolutionary tool, but it's one which, if we look back, stuff has actually changed. Buildings have been built. There are things happening right now based on plans of 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, and I'm happy to see that. But I just want to say that, planning is a big tent. I mean, planning can be like the land use and zoning and so forth, but planning is also what happens when we remake our infrastructure in significant ways. And I'm showing this image as part of a pop quiz for you all. What year was the Ohio completely channelized? all canals. They finally finished all the locks and dams. Excellent work. The city celebrated for 3 days. 3 days of celebration. Now, some aspects of that, like the actual passenger boats, were already kind of easing their way out of being significant. The train had taken over. You can see, I think those are mostly Model A's, so it's relatively early in the era of the automobile. The Mon Wharf was the parking lot forever. People complained about it over and over again. They still sometimes do. But I just want to say, like, that when we talk about things that we, talk to you about green infrastructure and all the kind of major, the transportation infrastructure, network, and so forth, having to do big things with those, which have big dollar tickets, and at the same time bring up issues of local and neighborhood and sort of citywide and regional, that sort of complexity is nothing new. But the important thing is that we actually sometimes sit down and do the work, and that we actually do the kind of transformational infrastructure work that has to get done. And now that's a lot different than the how much you're permitted to extend your deck on the neighbors in your backyard in a certain type of district. But both of those are part of my job, and both of those are very important. But in this image, I just want to say that the planning happens all the time. We're in a world in which there's this. If you didn't channelize the Ohio, so many things would never have happened. I mean, there was a whole second phase of the city's relationship to the river that happened. That happened this way. And so when we think about planning, and when we think about something like the work that has to be done vis-a-vis combined sewage overflow and the kind of the sewage system, and the sort of then even potentially back to issues for the water system, all of that has to be recognized that this is a historic process in which major decisions have to be made. They are complex, they take time to do, and they take time to work out. They've been wanting to channelize the Ohio since about 1888. And so it took a little time. Now, planning. I just want to note that the century of plans, the century of change. From channelizing the Ohio in the 1920s to just things. When I say that planning works, I look around and see that it's been, Station Square started in the 70s, but I am thrilled that there is new work happening in Station Square. That, we may debate the exact nature of these projects and so forth, but I am thrilled that the kind of planning infrastructure that was laid down, the sort of investments that were laid down, are translating into the work that is now going through the sort of final part of the permitting process for East Station Square, and is also happening, and there's other work happening also nearby that we're very excited about, the sort of reinvention. Everything that Station Square was in the 70s and the type of to simplify the market, the festival marketplace kind of concept that it was drawing on at that time, some of that has to change, some of that transforms, but at the same time that planning work, that thinking it through, then doing it and laying it out, and then actually getting the legal things clear and so forth, even though you have to revisit them in the process in certain ways at different times, that's showing that planning works. If people hadn't put the energy into and hadn't had the patience for the planning of Station Square that was done in the 70s, we wouldn't have this outcome today. And so the bones of the city that were laid down, whether you look at the Station Square in the 70s, whether we think of the Pittsburgh Tech Center, which the 85, I think was when the plan was going to, I think the URA got control in like 84, and the sort of real planning work, and the big grant comes through in 84, and the real planning work is sort of underway and almost done in 85, and then the building starts in 91. I am thrilled that there's new projects coming to the Tech Center. The Tech Center was always supposed to have some projects other than just straight commercial office, and it looks like now that might really happen. That's a plan. There was a plan that was done. There was an SP district. There was as well as part of a larger planning idea for the way that the riverfronts would be redeveloped after the collapse of industry in the 70s and 80s. And many of you lived this, so I know I'm preaching to the converted, but at the same, in the choir, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I recall this, because when I look at what's going on, we sometimes, when we're working away on some project that's sort of, some sort of SP district, and it doesn't, we don't quite see the future, it's a good reminder that in fact, when you lay the bones and when you put out the work of planning, it actually leads to stuff. Sometimes not the next year, sometimes not within the 5-year cycle that we all kind of look forward to, but sometimes within a 10, 15, 20, and it is planning works. And similarly, the downtown plan from the 90s. I mean, I look around downtown, And there's so much stuff that came in through the process just before I got here, and now there's a next generation of stuff. And many of these projects, they're there in part because of planning work that was done. And that's why I'm asking you to remember that I'm sure some of you lived the plan in the 90s, for the downtown, late 90s. There's not every single aspect of that plan that I think is perfect when I look at it. But at the same time, I recognize that so much of the stuff happening there is because there was a planning framework that was laid down. It was turned into code, it was turned into principles, it was turned into process, and that we do it every day. So we kind of unconsciously, and we sometimes think it seems like it's difficult, and there are some things that I would like to change. I think the trigger for certain types of review is a little could be raised a little bit, but don't say that publicly. I think that 50,000 seems a low bar for requiring a certain type of review to me. But that's not been reviewed. There's not an announcement. It's just because we do care. I want to make clear though, we do care. And our goal is we are activist planners. We do want to be. This is a planning department that wants to plan, wants to be involved, wants to review, wants to sort of make sure that principles and both the law and the principles underneath them are all the kind of being part of the way the city is made. But that doesn't mean that we can't reform and look at stuff and look at code, and we are doing that. A lot of that may end up being really a 2016 project, and it's starting now. And we're really starting with process first. We've had in Corey Lehman, our zoning administrator, and his group, we've had an amazing team that's been looking at some issues about how we interface and so forth, just really the line staff in the process. And I know some of you were involved in that. But we're also looking at sort of larger questions of where the code could do, I'm not conceiving a major overhaul of our code, but I think there's work to do, and that is on the agenda. Once we sort of get some of our other initiatives kind of away, but I want you to know that we're thinking about that and looking at that, and we'll continue to look at that. But all that said, I still think we have a lot of great stuff in our planning code, and it works in many ways, and whether it's from the districts, whether it's from the zoning categories, whether it's from even some of our process, I think actually it works pretty well. And I have to hear from you more about what the problems with it are, but I really appreciate the planners who came before me and the work that they did with the people of Pittsburgh to make sure that we actually had the bones of a city and a framework to really make the success that we're seeing now happen. One of the things that, and the waterfront plans that came in each decade, so conceptually, I just want to say something but I mentioned that channelization, and we think about the rivers. And this is sort of a big theme, it's not news, but we have been in a 100-year process of moving from an industrial infrastructure to a civic infrastructure. I think about this particularly vis-a-vis the rivers, but when you think about the functions of the city, and then it's sort of the heyday of industrialism of 1870, 1910, when there's sort of astonishing growth. And the rivers in particular became part primarily of an industrial infrastructure in which they served, and then, and things were rough. And there was, I'm not going to try and quiz you on how many cases of typhoid there were in 1906. There were 623 fatalities from typhoid. And so when I said that was because there had been a kind of imbalance between the notion of an industrial infrastructure, the river serving industry, and the civic infrastructure of being the place where we drew our water from the Allegheny. But what happened was, and this was from an activist city that looked at what was going on, they consciously addressed the question of what are we going to do about this? How are we going to build a filtration plant? And it opened finally in 1908. And they did it because they were sort of shocked into the system of change that was necessary. Today, we don't have the same types of shocks, but at the same time, we have a similar urgency in the way that we have to continually remember that our infrastructure, whether it's of the river, of the roads, etc., has purposes which are have both a purpose which is industrial still. We sometimes talk about Pittsburgh as a post-industrial city. Well, for a post-industrial city, I see an awful lot of barges full of coke and coal going up and down the river. We're not, it's changed. Our role locally in manufacturing has changed, but this is to me what planning can do when planning's doing its job right. When planning's doing its job right, it helps us understand that we're in a kind of, that these things, we don't sort of all of a sudden become post-industrial, become a place that changes and still has, and as long as it understands the baseline of its infrastructure and how it has multiple purposes. It has to help public health, it has to help our natural systems, it has to help our economic health. As long as we continue to do that, we will get where we need to go. And I'm mentioning this historic aspect, which many of you know. I'm mentioning it because we're sort of at a similar point. 100 years later, we have a lot of work to do on this. And so when we ask you and talk to you about it, I'm asking you to sort of, and I don't want to think of it as some sort of abstraction that's never been done before, or some newfangled idea. This is foundational to the health of this city and region. This is just, in case you're wondering, talking about a sort of different sort of industrial infrastructure. That's the Strip. It's not exactly what the Strip has coming right now. The sort of change. This is, of course, when we were the industrial infrastructure of transportation. It's actually the primary transportation infrastructure. And then the 20th century reform. And I'm not going to give you a history lecture, but I just want to mention a few things and then get on to some current work. You all know this stuff, but when you look back at it, it's astonishing. When you look at the Pittsburgh survey, the depth. Pittsburgh has been a leader historically in analyzing the condition of its city and the condition of its people and the condition of its environmental systems. And that's when we're trying to do that again. I mean, it is a very high bar. It is a very high bar to try and do work at the level of the 1907 Pittsburgh survey, one of the sort of landmark documents in the history of social science and sociology and really planning in the United States. But that's the kind of thing that we're looking at, because the foundational message there that you actually have to know what you've got, whether that's housing, whether that's environmental, whether that's economic, and then you can work, then you can do a better job planning for it. That's why we have the work that's going on now with Chief Lamb and the mayor and others working very hard to improve our data and to create a regional data center, to really move forward at a higher level than we've ever had before in terms of both the amount of data and the accuracy of it about all of the situations in the city, but also the accessibility and the transparency of it. And that's a talk that actually Chief Lamb should be giving to you, so I'm just sort of bookmarking it. But I want to give you the sense that, like, when I talk to her about it, I'm looking back at this time, can we actually raise to the standard of 100 years ago? Similarly, the Olmsted Report, the Civic Commission in 1910, the city brought in the best designers in the world to look at the planning issues in this city, and the best planners, really. And then some of their work took a long time to have effect, but it did. The creation of the civic side of the City Planning Commission in 1911, the Art Commission in 1911, and then finally, because they're dissatisfied with what's happening in government, there is a Citizens Committee on City Plan, 1923, and then the city has to keep up with what the nonprofits are doing, what the public sector is doing, the civic reform movement are doing, and finally there's a city zoning code in 1923. So there's this historic baseline, and I know that there's a little more history than you might have expected from this morning, but I can't do my job without recognizing this stuff. And I think we can't sort of see what we're doing, because what we do in this city, this is actually a historic moment for the city. And I want you to sort of get that perspective from this today, because that's how I look at it. And so all these things, data-driven decision-making, information, mapping, community development, all of these are not brand new. There's something we can draw on. I'm going to show you an image now. This is a data map. It's a data-driven decision-making about where people live relative to the parks in 1923. And which, again, this is not a new style of thinking, of knowing where we live, where we work, where we learn, where we play. And then this is a map that we did about a year ago of underserved areas, which is almost exactly the same type of information and the same type of attitude. For 100 years, we've been trying to make sure, not just that planning has been looking into the question of the quality of people's lives and the health of people's lives for 100 years. And so we're looking at it again. We hope intensively. The comprehensive plan portion on the open space was completed and is being fulfilled now with projects like the vacant lot toolkits and others. But I want to just sort of underscore this heritage that we have as we move forward. And we're a city that has the intellectual acumen and the capacity to do planning with data and to do the technological work and to do all this that was mentioned, whether it's driverless cars, which I will say, if a driverless car system can work in Pittsburgh, it can work anywhere. So, and that's why it's so exciting that we might get that, because we are really going to prove something. You know, now they've just been, driving around over on Almano or something. It's going to be quite different when they really, really go to town. And then just one little note about the public. There is, private investment is absolutely critical. It's what makes the city work. But I will just note one thing. This is 1923. This is, the green is where they had clear title. The public had clear title to property. And if you look at it closely and squint a little bit, you will see that where we had public control in 1923 is the foundation of where there was riverfront parks about 90 years later, and the work that was done with so many people here, the Murphy administration and others, really, so many people contributed to that. But it's the, and in 1923, they said, in their report, they said, if you've got a public space, it should be accessible to the public. Even though you would think their primary interest was the railroads and industry, they had a foundational issue that remains with us today. And so when we talk about the public realm as the most important part of city planning, it's not a new idea. It's just being emphasized and articulated in a new way. So, just in case you thought they didn't have ideas about how to make the waterfront pretty 100 years ago. And then, so from a complex present, from a complex past, and planning now. And I just, again, I've already mentioned how great it is to see that our central business district is doing better, and the type of which to me seems like plans that are actually being fulfilled. And that, whether it's academic, commercial, residential, cultural, and even new issues for mobility. Secondly, I want to, we are in this dynamic decision-making laboratory. This is actually a window in Oakland. It is a program at the university. But we are in that planning today, it remains in that form. And so the plans of the last 25 years, which many of you have been part of, have had an enormous impact. What I'm here this morning to ask you for, and with this historical context, is to ask your support for the plans that are really for the next 25 years. So let me tell you a few of these things. I'm going to go through this quickly because I know I've seen 3 people look at their watch. You can come talk to me later. But I want to emphasize this. With neighborhoods, the exciting thing that we're really looking at now, and it's been talked about before, but we are really going to try and do it now, is we're trying to, neighborhoods to me, and the planning that goes on in them, whether it's a sort of district one, an aggregated one, or a neighborhood-specific one, those are very important. They're the building blocks of the comprehensive plan in terms of land use. They are not, we have not had a technical way of recognizing them, certifying them. We have lines in our code which say reference to the neighborhood plan. We say as a sort of policy matter, go talk to your neighbors, talk to community. But we're going to try, and it's going to be a careful we're going to try, to see how we can actually begin to recognize them, both to improve the quality of our planning and our comprehensive plan, and recognize the destiny of the city is tied up in its neighborhoods as much as anything else. And also, we have high hopes, and humbly, that it might actually make some of the plans better. In terms of what we're going to do as a first step in this direction is that I'm asking carefully a couple from different parts of the city. I'm going to ask sort of current planning efforts in neighborhoods, whether there's sort of district ones or sort of more tight, to actually present their plan to the Planning Commission. At this stage, not for approval, we don't have or even certification, we don't have that into the code yet, but really as an exercise, beginning to recognize that this could be it could be good for everyone to have a little bit more formal recognition of that. So that's, on the neighborhood side, when I talk about planning for the next 25 years, that's a sort of simplified version of where we hope to go, but that's where we are. And that's why we're sort of, when I go to Sheridan for the beginning of a neighborhood planning process, when I go to Southside Forum for a sort of more district group, when I hear about planning that, planning was involved, but a lot of this planning goes on without us, and it's not a terrible thing. That I am thrilled that there are communities that are able to do good planning. And my hope is that we can actually raise that bar for everyone collectively, and sort of for communities to actually talk to each other, as well as to us and back and forth, and that's the process that we're hoping to have emerge. You know the neighborhoods, I don't have to do that. Then I wanted to go for cultural heritage, to say a few things that we're in process with right now. This as follow through on the cultural heritage plan. We are doing inventory, architectural inventories in neighborhoods. We started in Troy Hill. We're continuing in that area. We'll be adding additional areas, and as the funding works out, we're going to actually know what the city has in terms of its actual architectural inventory, which is the beginning, survey, then plan. We're looking at the questions of preservation and conservation. We'll be having workshops about the conservation district and that concept, which is a little sort of like historic preservation in terms of its form, the way it can help retain a neighborhood's shape and form, but it's different in terms of the level of regulation and the way it works in the process. Third, we're going to sort of have a forum about the economic and a report on the economic value of preservation. And we're also finally, at the request of many preservationists, reviewing the process and seeing how we can make it better. To me, well, I believe in preservation. I think that, and I don't always, I can't say that it's the most, I can't say that it's not without challenges, but I think the battles, even in some cases, or at least the struggles and discussion that we're having about historic preservation in the city right now, is actually a great one, because we have communities that are committed to the history and preservation, and are also committed to, we also have people that are very committed to what's coming next. And so that bridge, one way or another, we have to make that bridge. And whether that is bound to have, that's a bridge which is going to have a lot of, let's say, more, let's say, compression, and then I think we sort of think of it as a bridge with lots of trusses and all the stuff that goes on in those terms of tension and compression. So moving on to three other things, and I'm just going to because we need to get on to questions. Because what time is it, Lou? I should have, could you give me the time?
It's 9:10.
Oh my gosh, all right, we got it. All right, a few of the major things. You've heard about this. I'm happy to answer questions about it. We are moving forward with two things vis-a-vis Uptown. As you know, the work that's happening in the Uptown one is sort of connecting what is a sort of a mobility project of a BRT that would actually connect downtown to Oakland, but also recognize that the area in between Uptown is not just sort of drive-through territory, that actually is a community that this could actually help and strengthen. And that's why, in addition to we're looking at combining these two things and having it also be an eco-innovation district project. We've put out the RFQ, we've gotten fantastic responses. It's a major project which we're trying to put the issues of community development, infrastructure, environmental performance, all on the table at the same time as a potential major infrastructure project vis-a-vis the transportation connections between downtown Oakland and all the places in between, and a neighborhood that will truly be connected to the city. This is the interim planning overlay district, which is in the review process now with City Council, and is basically taking a portion where we felt it was critical to actually define a few issues in terms of the priorities for review and process, and sort of so that we wanted to make sure that for the 18-month period of the interim planning overlay district, while we work on this eco-innovation district plan, there were some new guidelines in place. We can discuss that more in detail if you're interested. And then finally, Almano, the next generation of mixed use. I think that was the Rose Fellowship was a great opportunity to sort of take the great work that's being done by the RDC and the owners of that project, and sort of like looking again at the plan for it, and like what will make it even stronger. The ULI asked the right questions, and I think was a very stimulating interchange, which is helping the city move forward. And I think this is the way they summarize the challenge, which might be, you could almost describe as the planning challenge for Pittsburgh, period. How can Almano better connect to Hazelwood and Pittsburgh, and how can its redevelopment be best leveraged? Which is really the larger question of how can we have this incredible opportunity of the type of development we're having. We've had eds and meds, and now we have tech, and but tech is tender. And so the choices we make will either support or not support that, and that's why it's really important that we have the leadership from you all and so forth to help that happen. But at the same time, we don't want this to translate into the tale of two Pittsburghs, which we face in terms of the questions of affordability and so forth. And so even at the local issue of what is the relationship between the Almano site and the Hazelwood community directly around it, those are ones that we want to make sure we find a way so it's not just window dressing but profound. And at the same time, encouraging the type of growth and development that can happen there. Not an easy challenge, but one that we have. And so I think I'm going to, because I think we need to turn to questions. I will note that we are looking at potentially a riverfront performance zoning and an interim planning overlay district potentially there as well. It's not we really think that there's a next generation of riverfront development and that we have to recognize it. This is again something that's been in guidelines and discussion for some time. We want to actually move it forward, and we'll be moving this forward in a discussion and then hopefully into legislation ultimately in 2015 and 16. I'm just, this is not a precise map of where it would be located. This is sort of looking at the, it's just sort of looking at the larger picture of the largest scope that one would begin to look at. But part of the point of this, and I want to make this clear, is not just about the riverfronts themselves, but it's about reconnecting the riverfronts and how, whether that's legislative or whether that's initiatives or policy, how that will happen. Because we've had these amazing historic connections between the hillsides and the city and the riverfronts, whether to get to industry, and we have a new generation of them coming and sort of reconnecting a green infrastructure of the city again to the riverfronts. So, I'm just going to end with this, the themes of reconnecting the city, affordable housing, which again, that's another talk in the future. I'm going to co-chair the affordable housing group with Councilman Lavelle, the task force, but that's something we'll be working on and we'll be reporting out to you, engaging you in the discussion of that. I will say that I start from a foundational perspective that this is, I wanted what I always felt when the affordable issues were coming up in a variety of legislative ways and so forth. I said, the one thing I want is to actually have the information we need about how this would ever really work. And that, if we're going to set criteria and going to set goalposts and so forth, we have to have all the information in front of us, and we have to have a very robust discussion of what the options are and what the feasibility is of it. And that is what we're going to do. And I'm going to end on this, which is not to say that all that matters is, I don't want to put this in the war on cars category. This is, because that's not where we are, not where we're going. We love cars. We're going to be the center of driverless cars. But even those driverless cars, no matter how good they are, if this is a 2035 network analysis in which you basically take, let's see, level of service. We will have level of service F in all of these roadways. F is very bad. You have to wait a long time. Let's put it this way. Level of service F, there's a really long time when you're stopping at a light before you get to actually go through the light. So if we're really, one way or another, and actually driverless cars will help with this. You might even find that sort of level of service E, but if no one's actually driving themselves. Seriously, it becomes part of, that is part of, the answers, and I want to underscore that because the answers to the challenges we have are not something simple like nobody should drive cars or whatever. There are technological issues that we're using. There's smart city stuff. All of this is on the table. All of this in terms of like how we actually don't see this and how we actually still have a functional mobility plan is on the table. And it's so, because not planning is not an option. So thank you very much.